This is Sarah Duncan interviewing Rick Main for the Sandy Creek Park Oral History Project at the Russell Library. This is July 25th, 2005, and we're at Keepsakes by Shirley on Atlanta Highway in Athens, Georgia. And actually, the first thing I should ask you is how do you spell your last name?
M-A-I-N.
M-I-A-I-N. Okay, that's what I had down. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Let's see. I don't know what to say. You
You
want
can
a
start
history
anywhere
of,
you like.
Well,
Where you were born or what you did for the SES or anywhere you like.
Okay, well, originally from Ohio. Came down here in 1970 with the U.S. Forest Service.
Okay.
Worked with them at Forestry Sciences Lab there on campus. And transferred to the Soil Conservation Service in 71, I believe it was. 72, one or the other. And worked there until I retired in 94. At one time I was a personnel officer, but most of the time I spent as what they called a contract specialist, which we were in charge of all types of acquisitions. Anything from pens and paper to cars and office buildings, leases for office space, and construction, mostly floodwater dams like Little Sandy Creek. And we did a lot of channel work and some recreation stuff like the swim beaches and things out there, but mostly flood control work. Then in the latter part of in the early or late 80s, I guess it was, we set up a national task force for flood control work around the country. And when we'd have like a hurricane in South Carolina here a few years ago, they'd put together a group of us, and we'd go try to restore the area to what it was before the flood. I wasn't too often involved because I retired here in '94, but we went spent some time in West Virginia. But the task force itself, went all over the country to do that kind of thing, which was a lot of fun.
Huh, yeah. And when was that was in the late 80s?
When we started it, yes. It's still going on.
Yeah.
The people that are still there, I guess, are still doing some of it.
Yeah, yeah. What kind of stuff were you doing there?
Mainly, when you have a big flood, a stream will go out of its bank and maybe start a new channel. Our job was to put it back where it was.
Okay.
Try to restore the area to what it was before the flood.
I see, yeah.
Put the stream banks back, revegetate them, stabilize them so they won't wash off.
Yeah.
Maybe have to replace a bridge or something along the way, or depending on what it was. Along the coast, it would be beach restoration. And sometimes putting in some type of water break up the wave action that comes in so it won't happen again.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
So.
Actually, before we go on. Okay, there we go. What kind of educational background did you have?
A few years at Ohio State University, a few quarters over here, and mostly in service training.
Yeah, yeah.
We have an extensive, the Soil Conservation Service had an extensive training program, several hundred hours of training in different fields, either purchasing or contracting, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And you'd worked with the Forest Service, did you say before that? What did you do for the Forest Service?
I was what they called an administrative officer.
Okay.
In charge of, hiring, firing,
Okay.
paying the electric bill,
Uh-huh.
seeing that the air conditioner worked, that kind of thing.
So you came down here from Ohio to go to UGA for a while, and then.
No, I transferred because of the job.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I was with the Forest Service in Ohio, and I was offered to either go to Philadelphia or Athens, Georgia. Well, I had never been to Athens, but I'd been to Philadelphia, and I knew I didn't want to go there. So we ended up here, and we liked it. We've been here for 35 years now.
Great. Wow.
And don't plan to move.
It looks like you're pretty well settled in. So then, originally with the SCS, what was your first job with them?
Purchasing agent,
Okay.
and then personnel officer, and then contract specialist.
Okay. But maybe you could describe just kind of the day-to-day work of contract specialists, what you would do.
Well, because you'd oversee 3 or 4 people that were buying the pens and pencils and issuing orders, either, at that time mostly in writing, written purchase orders, developing the wording and the detail for contracts for construction. And sometimes, these things get pretty thick with legalese that you had to put in there and be sure that you had the right clauses and things in there for that particular type of work.
Okay.
That was mainly. And then go out and see that the work got done right.
Yeah.
Check it out, which was
So-
the fun part of it, because you got out of the office.
Yeah. So you did get to spend some time in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And was that was your job while Sandy Creek Park was being built?
Yes.
How did you first get involved in the Sandy Creek Park project?
The organization,
In the park project itself.
I don't really know who actually went to the county commission and said, look, we've got some money from the Congress is giving us all this money. Let's spend a little bit of it here. Somebody in our organization went to them with this idea, and they liked the idea, so they developed a joint effort there to develop it. I got involved because of the construction part of it,
Okay.
seeing that there again, the paperwork was proper.
Yeah. Who do you remember, I guess, really pushing for the project at that point?
I don't really know, because I wasn't involved until they got to the point of actually getting ready to do the work.
Okay, I see.
So I don't know who decided that would be a great thing. I know the county commissioners were involved, because that's when they had county commissioners and a separate city government before they consolidated. And I don't remember the county commissioner's name, the chairman at that time.
Was it Jim Holland, maybe?
He was, it might have been. He was chairman there for a while.
Okay.
But memory's not that good anymore.
Well, his name has come up a few times. Yeah.
Okay. But the way this thing, we were given money to do these recreation projects, and we could put up half the money. In other words, if the job cost $1 million, we could put up $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
The county had to put up the other half. And they could either do it in cash money or in work, labor.
Mm-hmm.
Clark County decided to do it with labor. And we split the thing down so that their labor covered their half of it. And it worked out pretty well. I think they ended up having to put up just a few $1,000s cash because it didn't quite balance out. But the majority of it worked out real well. Their 50% of covered labor. And by using the prisoners, they actually made money, I would think, because, in other words, we designed a project, we would determine what it would cost to build, and allocate whatever the labor was to the county, saying, this is your share. Well, if they got it done cheaper, that was okay, because, that was their desire.
Yeah.
They could have gone out and hired somebody to do it, and we'd still paid them the same amount of money. So they came out in good shape. And they were able to do a lot more things because of this jail labor that they could.
Yeah.
Of course, we accused George of, he was real close with the sheriff at that time, of arresting certain people because they had certain capabilities. Like one fellow was a bulldozer operator, and he'd go out and once he got out of jail, they'd go arrest him again. So they but he didn't do that.
Do you remember what the park looked like the first time you saw it?
But it was just covered in trees. There was no, it was just, they had cleared out a little area around the dam, around the lake, because they built the lake back in, late 60s, I think it was, before I got involved. But it had kind of grown up. It was just wild, typical country,
Yeah.
with trees and grass and weeds.
Yeah. Was there any kind of farming going on there? Or?
I don't think so. I think it was in forest, in trees,
Okay.
I believe. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, when I got involved there, we went out and they started clearing it immediately to build I think we built the swimming beach first. And it was about I want to say about a 5 or 6 year project.
Okay.
But I think I was involved 5 or 6 years, and then I got involved in some other things, and the county kind of changed directions, and George left. So I don't know if they did much after George left or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when did you first see it?
Ooh,
The other side.
I really don't know. Probably would have been in the mid-'70s. I don't know the exact date,
So,
Yes.
because we were doing about 7 or 8 of those at the same time, so I don't know
yeah.
which one we were doing then.
So post-dam, pre-park.
No,
So,
A little pre, not too much. I probably never went on the site before they started working on it.
okay.
Then once they started working on it, I was out there quite often, just
yes, every day.
see things going along.
You're welcome.
We assigned an engineer and a couple technicians, civil engineering technicians, to help oversee the work.
Mhm.
And they were out there on a daily basis. And I'd go there once in a while to see how they were doing, see if things were working. And to get with George, because George and I would try to balance out the money, be sure the money balanced out. And if he wanted to go and do this certain item, we had to be sure that he wasn't earning too much money, that he wasn't doing more than his 50%. Because the rules that Congress set up for this money said that the county could not do more than 50%.
Oh, really?
If they once got to 50%, they had to stop and pay money. We couldn't reimburse them more than 50%,
Okay.
regardless
I see.
of what they did.
Yeah.
And they did do more, but they did on their own.
Yeah. So it had to be exactly.
Thanks.
Or
50-50.
as close as we can get it,
Yeah.
you know.
Hello?
Yeah. I see.
So George and I kept that balanced. We probably got together about 2 or 3 times a month to go over that and be sure that it was stayed in balance.
What was the money from the Soil Conservation Service used for? Do you know?
It was just money appropriated by Congress specifically for water-based recreation.
I mean, like what parts of the park would that have been used for? Obviously, not labor costs, because those are
Well-
pretty much taken care of. What?
But everything that required any type of the buildings,
Okay.
the soccer fields, because there's soccer nets out there, they had to be purchased. Grass and fertilizer had to be purchased for the soccer fields. Basketball goals, basketball court, fishing piers.
No, ma'am. It's 2575.
I don't know if they put a boat dock in out there or not.
Yeah.
There's a boat dock. A boat ramp, I don't know.
Yeah. It's a boat ramp.
The camping on the far side, on the east side of the dam, the camping area. Horse trails. Anything, because on the horse trail they had to buy fencing and stuff to put on the trail, bark or whatever they used. So anytime there was an expenditure like that, then we were involved as far as the money was concerned.
Okay. I see. So all the materials, that went into the park,
Right.
contracting for building the actual structures. Is that right?
And the materials for the structures.
Okay.
And some of them we had to hire laborers because George didn't have brick masons
Yeah.
and specialized
Yeah.
laborers, so we had to hire that to be done.
No one around to arrest for.
Not at that time.
That's too bad. Had you ever worked on any other projects like this?
Recreation projects? Yeah, we had a bunch going at that time. We did a big one up on Lake Lanier. Mainly they're just camping areas and boat docks. And restrooms and showers and things like that. Those were probably the 2 larger ones we did right around here. We did some up on Hiwassee and around some in North Georgia. And then down on the coast we did a lot of boat docks, boat ramps, and fishing piers, because we could do a large number of those kinds of things, spread them all out all over the state, because they didn't cost much money.
I see. Yeah.
If you're building a boat dock, you might have $10,000 or $20,000 in it. Or if you're building a big recreation area like this, you might have $2 or $3 million. Well, you can spread it out and do more good for more people by building smaller things.
Yeah.
So we built just dozens and dozens of fishing piers and boat docks and boat ramps, mostly in South Georgia.
And who are the sponsoring agencies for
Counties.
most of the county? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the requirements. The county had to sponsor it and maintain it after it was built.
Okay.
And they had to be willing to maintain it.
Why? Do you know why it was that Sandy Creek in particular was such a large project?
I think because our headquarter office is here in town,
Oh, okay.
and it was one of the first ones that we got involved in, so they wanted to see what we could do, see how far we could go, how many different things we could do, since we'd never done too much of that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's the main reason is that it's so close to the head people they could take credit for it, you know. When they had people come down from the national office, then they could take them out there and show them around,
Yeah.
see what the money was doing.
I see. Do you remember how the design for the park was decided on?
I don't know how the particular design was decided on, but I know it was a big problem in that we put out bids for architects, and they came back, I forget what the dollar amount was, but relatively high. And the county didn't like it, didn't agree with it. They didn't want, the architect, they had to put up half the money, the county did.
Okay, so that was actually...
Construction was half, and architect was half too.
Okay.
So they didn't want to spend that much money, but they found a local architect that would do it for about a third of what the lowest bid was.
Huh.
And they decided they'd go with that, and we told them we couldn't because the guy wasn't qualified, so we didn't spend any money on it. But they went ahead anyway,
I see.
and that caused a several-year delay in the project because this fellow was having problems trying to get the design. He was a landscape architect trying to design buildings,
Oh, I see.
and he didn't have the background.
Yeah.
So several years after they finally got all the designs, they came back to us and said, look, would you look this over and see if you can help us do it? And we put our design engineers on it to well, almost completely rewrite the darn thing
Oh, really?
of the designs because he didn't know how to figure weights and loads and things. You know, if you put a roof on it, the supports would have to be such and such, and he didn't know how to do that. So we had to have our people do that. Some of us didn't like that idea that we shouldn't be spending our money for that kind of thing,
I see.
but
Yeah.
and they did. But as far as the design of the particular buildings, why the buildings look like they do, I don't know who first decided that. It was a group thing at the end, I know,
Oh, I
saying
see.
this is what they wanted.
Okay.
Mainly the county said this is what we'd like to have, and we said, I don't see why not. You know, we didn't care what they looked like as long as they were substantial and would stand up to for many, many years.
Uh-huh.
That was our main thing.
Yeah, yeah. What about not so much just the buildings, but just the overall layout of the park? Was that kind of reworked too?
No, that was pretty well set out. You know,
Okay.
where the fishing items would be and where the swim beach would be and that kind of thing. In the initial design, which that part of it was in pretty good shape.
Okay. See.
Yeah.
So it was the buildings that.
Yeah, and some of the buildings had been moved a little bit even after it was decided what to do because of the topography or it wasn't a good place to put it because a road would be better through there. So, you know, just once you get on the ground, you have to make some changes.
Oh yeah.
Most of it was pretty well set up ahead of time.
Well, what was it like working with the county? I mean, it sounds like that that maybe wasn't the the best thing, but in that
No,
case.
once you got started, I'm trying to remember who was there before George, and I can't come up with the name, but George was probably one of the easiest person to work with I've ever had the privilege of working with. I mean,
Yeah.
he took pride in doing it, and he wanted to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And he put many, many hours out there that he didn't have to do. But you can see if you've been out there, you can see the result.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a nice place. No, he made it easy to work. We had a little problem with some of the paperwork in that there was just so much of it, and trying to add all the figures up sometimes took a while, but it wasn't a problem. It just time consuming.
When you say there's a lot of paperwork, is that kind of just legal stuff or?
Well, trying to
budget?
decide, be sure that we balanced out.
Oh, I see.
In other
Yeah.
words, you know, if they needed a pound of nails or a roll of wire or something, and being sure that the receipt for it was in the file so that they could add them up and come up with a figure.
I see. Yeah.
You know, sometimes they'd send somebody out for it, and they'd forget to bring in the receipt, or it'd get filed in the wrong file.
Boy. You mentioned, let's kind of get broader for a minute. You mentioned before, as we were starting, that Congress actually decided that the Soil Conservation Service should begin doing recreation projects. Was Sandy Creek originally going to be a recreation
No.
project in part? Oh, really?
No, it was built strictly for floodwater control.
Okay.
And not until probably 6-7 years after it was built was it decided to be because at the time it was built, we did not have the authority to do recreation work. This was something that came about in the 70s.
Oh, I see.
Just some new projects that came out. And we don't do it anymore.
Oh, really? Huh. Why not? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think maybe part of the National Park Service doing it now.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, hold on. a minute.
So it was actually the dam. All that whole project was already sort of in process quite a while before.
It was actually
recreation
completed.
aspect. Oh, okay.
It had been completed for a number of years before any recreation work was done out there.
Okay. Huh. That's interesting.
And the reason it was chosen over, there was about 4 of them right up in that general area.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the largest one.
Mm-hmm.
Is the reason it was chosen.
Uh-huh.
The others are smaller. I think they're about half the size of that one.
Okay.
So there's a lot more water,
Yes.
so you can canoe around in.
Yeah. Do you know if any user studies were done or anything like that to try to, look at who was expected to use the park?
I don't know if it's any done initially, but I do know before we built any of the recreation area, there was one or two done to be sure, well, not to be sure, so that we'd have some idea of the number of persons that might use these camping facilities.
Okay.
And there was even some talk of putting in some RV camping
Mm-hmm.
with underground water and electric and all that. I don't think they ever did that.
No, they haven't.
So what we call
Apparently, the idea has been revived from what I
Oh.
hear, but yeah, they
But I
haven't.
knew a study was also done on that, and
Mhm.
for some reason at the time we didn't do it. We just went with what they call the primitive camping.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So they had kind of looked into, how many people might use that kind of an area.
Yeah, and that was we thought they ought to have the RV camping because of the university football season.
Huh.
At that time, there were no, to my knowledge, there were no camping areas within about 30 or 40 miles of here that RV campers could use. I'm not sure there are too many now. There's some up around Gainesville.
Hmm.
But we thought it'd be a good idea, but it never got through. I don't know why.
Yeah. So in the planning for the park, I suppose it sounds as though recreation was a new thing for the Soil Conservation Service.
It was.
What were considered sort of the piers? What parks or what areas did the SCS look at to decide what they were going to put there at Sandy Creek?
Well, we didn't make that final decision, that decision as to what to put there, but we had some ideas that we'd gotten from the Forest Service. They've been doing this in the National Forest for a long time,
Uh-huh.
and from the National Park Service. We actually borrowed some of their building standards, so, shapes of buildings and what they're made out of, and what lasts and what doesn't last, and to get some ideas of what we could do. But as far as what actually went out there, that was the county's decision.
Okay. Yeah. I see.
In other words, because it's their property.
Mm-hmm.
If they wanted to put something out there that we didn't think that we could justify as water-based recreation, then we couldn't cost share in it. But very lenient on that. We're very liberal, so
Uh-huh.
so everything out there we think could in some way be tied into the water.
Huh.
In other words, the family would come out there to maybe the kids can swim in the lake, and the parents could play basketball or picnic or fish or something. So it's all ties in together.
Yeah, I see. Huh. So when you say water-based recreation, I suppose what's the definition of that?
I'm not sure there is one. We I guess the way we looked at it is if a family could be encouraged to come to that location to participate in any type of, even just get their feet wet, then we could consider that water-based recreation.
Mhm.
That's why we built some basketball courts there and tennis courts. We
Mhm.
thought, well, that's not, but it is. They might not come, the way we looked at it, they don't come just to play tennis. They come to picnic or to fish or to swim on the swim beach, and they might play tennis while they're there. Just expand it, give them a little bit more to do while they're at that location.
Okay.
So it's very broad. I don't think we could, I don't know what we could probably justify building most anything with the definition we used.
Okay.
Besides, I think we even talked at one time putting a baseball diamond out there. But we didn't have enough, there wasn't enough area, level area, so they made it into a soccer field.
Mm-hmm.
But and I haven't been out there in 15 years or so. They might have even put in a softball field or two out there, I'm not sure.
I think there is something like that, but
But see, now that wasn't part of our plan.
okay, I see.
We couldn't stretch it far enough to include a baseball field.
Yeah, I think the way it is now, there's something sort of like that, but it's not. There aren't lines, painted on the grass or anything, so it could be used for soccer or picnics or whatever. How did this compare to other Soil Conservation Service projects?
As far as what, money or time or?
Well, you can take that anywhere you want with it.
It was one of the smaller projects we were
Okay.
involved in. Most of our dams that we built, this was a small dam. It probably, at that time, only cost maybe $150,000.
Oh, really?
In the latter years, of course, as prices go up, things go up, and we were into building $2 or $3 million dams. This was a smaller project. The project we did in Lake Lanier was probably the largest recreation project we did. It was several hundred acres of RV camping with bathrooms and showers. And of course, then you have to run underground water and everything. So it was in roads. So it was a lot more involved.
Do you remember, I don't know if you were involved in this part of the project, but I've heard that there originally planned to be, I've heard anywhere from 10 to 14 dams as part of the Sandy Creek project, and 3 or 4 were actually built. Do you know why that was?
I don't know the exact number that was built, but when our design engineers would go into an area to do flood studies, they would design the maximum number of dams that would completely control the 100-year flood or the 200-year flood, depending on how serious it was.
Okay.
That means the amount of rain that comes down. They might design 15 dams. Well, they'll go in and build the most critical ones
Oh,
first.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And once they get done, because of changes in land use, it might not be feasible to build the others. They might, in other words, they might have wanted to put a dam right where the housing development is, or a factory. The factory wasn't there when it was designed, but 5 years later there's a factory there. Because these are long-term projects that might take 30 years to complete. And sometimes you can't go in, you can't do the rest of it. And I imagine that's probably what happened in this one, because when it was designed, it was almost all completely rural. The whole area right in there,
Oh.
Lower Jackson County, Upper Clark.
Oh,
3 or 4 years after we started building, then people started building houses and started doing this, putting in chicken houses, and they just couldn't build the dams then.
yeah.
Or maybe they weren't needed. Maybe these others did enough flood control with the changes up above to something else, but there was no problem then, so you didn't need to build them all. I can't remember ever building all the dams that were designed in an area because of these changes that come about.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the counties have other priorities. If you reduce the flooding to a certain extent that it doesn't cause too awful much problem, the county may say, well, that's enough. Let's put our money somewhere else, or let's get you to put your money somewhere.
I see.
That may be that's probably the main reason that it wasn't completed.
Yeah, I see.
And I don't think there's too much flooding problem in Athens anymore.
Uh-huh.
You get a little on the south end of town on what they call the old Macon Highway down there, but that's because of runoff in the city streets.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing you can do about that
Yeah.
from our standpoint.
So, as for the funding, I guess, now I know there's 50-50 for recreation, 50% funded by the Soil Conservation Service, 50% by the county. What about the other pieces of the project, like the dams
The flood
themselves?
control,
Yeah.
100% federal.
Okay.
The county was responsible for getting the land.
Uh,
Now, they might have to buy the land. Somebody might donate the land to them. However they got it, that was their problem. They had to get the land.
huh.
And once they got title to the land, then we would build the dam at no cost to the county
I see.
for the flood control. Now, we built some dams where it had to be, say, this high for flood control, and we built it this high
Mm-hmm.
for recreation purposes.
Mm-hmm. So,
The
a
county
bit
has to pay the
higher,
difference.
For example. Yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah, I see.
we can only pay the flood, but if they wanted a deeper pond or a bigger one, then they had to pay the difference. That wasn't the case here, because that dam was completed before they even started recreation.
Oh, okay.
So it was 100% federal money.
But the county actually bought not just the land for the park, or acquired, I should say, not just the land for the park, but the land actually for the dam and the lake itself.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I didn't realize that.
And I think most of it was donated,
Okay.
because it was just swampy, not good for anything. At least where the dam is. Now, the recreation area, they probably had to buy that,
Uh-huh.
because it was probably good farmland at one time.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I don't know.
Huh.
All we care about is they had a deed, that they had title.
Yeah, that sounds like the key thing.
It's more this, and they probably had to condemn some of it.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah. So you said the land where the lake actually is now was mostly swamp.
Yeah, it
Up
was
in your area. Okay, I didn't know that either.
unusable for most anything.
Okay. Huh. Was that because of erosion?
Just the way the land fell, you know.
Okay. Which is-
Just nice area to put the dam, because it's already swampy.
Yeah. Yeah, no need to worry about it. Huh. I've heard that the design of the dam is unique. Have you heard anything about this? Or no?
It's not. It's
Okay.
our standard design.
All right.
It's just an earth dam with what we call a concrete spillway,
Okay.
or a concrete, I guess spillway is a good word as any, where the water drains through. But it was just our standard design.
Okay. Was it larger or smaller or anything like that than average?
Probably a little bit larger than average.
Okay.
Not much, though. We've built a lot of them that are much, much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So we just finished one just before I retired up in Hall County that was probably 5-6 times as large.
Oh, really?
And about 50 foot deep right at the dam. It's a big one.
Huh, wow.
For water supply.
Yeah.
That was another program we got into. After we got out of recreation, we got into water supply. So we were building dams and helping counties develop rural water supply, water treatment plants and water towers and water distribution lines.
Huh.
Don't do that anymore either. Congress keeps switching these things around. Sometimes, certain times we can do certain things. But that was but this dam the Sandy Creek Dam was not much larger than average, I don't think,
Okay.
if I remember right.
You mentioned water supply. Now, I have heard that the water at Sandy Creek could be an emergency water supply for the city of Athens. Was that one of the goals of the project?
No,
Okay.
not when it was built.
Okay.
It was strictly flood water control.
So that may have been something that,
I
that
mean,
got tacked on.
Yeah, the water's there,
Yeah.
they certainly can use it if
Yeah. Huh.
need be.
What was the reaction within the SES when sort of the word came down from Congress that it was time to do recreation projects?
Well, most of the old time employees did not like it. They, radical change from what they were doing before. They were not really interested, but some of the younger folks thought it was a good, something different, and really got involved with it and did some nice work. Some really nice, well, like I say, up Lake Lanier, or over in Gwinnett County, we did a big recreation project with some. It is just very pretty. They got really involved, and our engineering staff especially, they got really took it to heart. And once the projects got started, they got really involved. Put a lot of effort into it, because they knew they'd be around a lot longer than they would.
Yeah.
Something to look at.
Yeah. What about in this project specifically?
Since it was one of the first ones, it was probably a little more difficult to get people enthused, our people,
Okay.
because they were used to working, in other places, doing other things, or something new. And anytime you got something new, it takes a little while to get people up and running and really behind the project.
What about you personally?
Oh, I got a big kick out of it. I like doing that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Just from the standpoint, it gave me a reason to get out of the office more often.
Yeah.
And there, it's something you can see. If you build a dam back in the boonies somewhere, only you and the landowners around there probably ever see it. Never even know it's there. But you build one of these recreation projects, and a lot of people see it, and they say, "Well, guys, Soil Conservation Service doing something for us. Government money coming back to help the local economy." So, that gives you a good feeling.
Huh. What kind of reaction did you hear from the public?
We didn't, of course, the county commissioners probably did. Probably a lot of adverse publicities or wasting their time. I don't know. We didn't hear any because we don't, we were not involved in the local politics or the local area. That was, we left that to the county commissioners. We didn't want local people to even know that we were involved, really.
Oh, really?
That was up to them. They should get the publicity for it and accolades, because that's the way it ought to work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. That actually is one thing that I heard, that it was kind of a big secret until the park actually opened in 1981. Do you remember that?
No, I don't know if they were trying to keep any secrets or not. There were a lot of write-ups in the paper in the 70s and early 80s
Okay.
about the construction and everything, so I don't know that they were trying to keep it undercover.
Maybe it's just because it was so far away that no one.
I don't know, it could be. I don't remember hearing anything about that.
Okay. Do you remember, I guess, about how long the SES was involved in this project from the very start to the,
Probably until about the time George Chandler left the county government. That's because we were involved up then, and after he left, I don't think we did any more work out there to speak of. Well, I'll take that back. We did. There was a lady's last name was Smith.
Nancy Smith.
Nancy. I couldn't think what her first name was. We did do some work with her, but mostly I think they were like riding trails and maybe some more picnic areas or something. None of the big items. They were already done. All the big buildings and things were done.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. But we didn't do much after he left, because it was probably 95% done when he left.
Huh.
Wasn't much to do.
Was that at all for political reasons, that just a contact had
No, it
gone,
just the building was done. There wasn't much, didn't need much of anything else.
Yeah.
I think they did build either build another building for an office or build a wing onto one building for an office.
Okay.
In other words, expanded a building. But I think that was the only really construction that went on.
Okay.
Just because the project was done. In other words, they set the project out, we're going to have this, and this. Well, this, it was all done.
Oh, you need that watch back
I see.
there.
Yeah. But then I guess somebody said, well, let's have some horse trails, which wasn't in the original, so they put in some horse trails.
I see.
But those kind of projects, they eventually get completed or run their course.
Yeah. Yeah. And was that the plan from the start, that the Soil Conservation Service would be involved in the construction phase and then leave the rest to the county?
Right, the county then would be responsible for maintaining it
Okay.
once it was complete.
Okay. What about any kind of additions? I mean, you did mention the horse trails. What if, I mean, if someone were to today, I mean, I know you're not with SCS anymore, but if someone were today to say, oh, let's have an RV park after all, would that be something that they would get involved in again? Or?
No, because then in the late 80s, early 90s, Congress decided we didn't need to be in recreation projects anymore. We were going to do some water supply.
Yeah.
So, no, we would not be authorized to do that anymore.
Okay. And I suppose I was going to say, oh, well, then if it was in water supply, maybe you could, but I guess not that anymore either.
Well, I don't think they're doing water supply anymore. I haven't kept up with them, but I don't think they are.
Huh. How did you see the park change over time from when you first saw it until, its completion, I suppose?
To tell you the truth, I didn't pay that much attention to it. I was more interested in seeing if the money worked out right. I know we'd go out there once in a while and see when a new building would be built, and we'd have to, especially if we had hired a contractor to do some of the work, then we'd have to be sure that what he did was correct before we paid him.
I see.
And when most anything was done, we'd go out and get with our engineers, and they'd go over and say, okay, well, this was built, this was done, this is completed, we can move on to another phase of the project.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really pay that much attention to
Okay.
how it looked.
Back to the money stuff then, how, I guess how involved were you on just a day-to-day level with the money? It said that, you said that, someone would have gone out and bought a few pounds of nails and then they would need to kind of get their receipt to you and so on. Was that, I guess what I'm asking is, how bureaucratic was it? How many people were kind of involved in each of these decisions?
I had one clerk that kept up with most of that, but George
Okay.
had a clerical person or secretary that was keeping the file. And like I say, once or twice a month, he and I'd get together and we'd go over the file to see if he thought, well, now, darn it, they did such and such and it's not in here.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be sure that it was complete.
Okay.
But as far as actual adding each thing up and come up with a total, 2 or 3 times a year we'd go through and do that, and then say, okay, well, that phase is done, and it all balances out, put that away, and we'll get on to the next one.
Okay.
So it wasn't all that involved, but keeping pieces of paper to have a trail was just the main thing.
Yeah, I see. So it wasn't as though every single day
Oh, no.
you were
no.
having to to kind of deal with this. How many projects would you work on at a time?
There varied a lot, probably a dozen, maybe 15.
Okay.
Some of them recreation, some flood control. It wasn't all recreation or anything like that. Depending a lot on how much money Congress gives us. See, each year they'd give us a different amount of money for construction purposes, for watershed work. Some years we could do everything we had staff to do and then hire some more staff because we got more money. And some years you wouldn't get too much money, you'd have to cut back. So and the size of the projects determined the number. If you had $10 million worth of construction money and you built 2 great big projects at $5 million apiece, you only did 2.
Yeah.
But we tried not to do that. We tried to do smaller projects where we could spread them out around and not concentrate in one area of the country.
Yeah. How big a project was Sandy Creek compared to?
I don't remember the total dollar amount, but it seemed like it was only like $400,000 or $500,000.
Oh, really?
I may be wrong there because I don't remember ever adding up the total.
Yeah.
We do it in phases.
Yeah.
This phase, as far as compared to other projects, it was probably small. It was one of the smaller ones, dollar-wise.
Okay.
But then it was done in the 70s and 80s, and dollars, if it had been done in the 90s, it cost us a lot more to do it.
Okay.
But it was one of the smaller projects.
Huh.
And it went on, purposely, it went on for a long period of time because the county didn't have the facilities to do it all at once. They had to do it in phases.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't build 4 buildings at the same time. They didn't have enough people.
Mm-hmm.
And they had other work to do. The county engineer's supposed to be working on roads and ditches and stuff.
Yeah.
So he couldn't put as much time in. So we set it up to do in phases.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was probably about somewhere like 8 or 10 year project.
Okay.
And because George was able to get in there and get work done, I think they cut it down to, they cut a couple of years out of that. They reduced the time period. So it probably, I'd have to look, but I think it probably only took 6 or 7 years to finish.
That sounds about right from what I've heard from other people. Yeah.
Initially, we thought it would take longer, but he was able to get a lot more work done than we had anticipated, or even the county had anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was able to go out and arrest these people.
That's good. You mentioned that your overall budget changed quite a bit from year to year, or from maybe administration to administration.
That too.
Did the budget for the Sandy Creek project ever change?
No. The way we work these projects, you'd set up the whole project and say it's going to be a 10-year project, and it's going to cost X number of dollars per year. So once we set that up and we agreed, and the county agreed with us, it was kind of set in concrete. And Congress says, okay, this money is earmarked for this period of time. You can't use it anywhere else. But it's still there. We're not going to take it away from you.
I see.
So the changes in our budgets did not affect that once the agreement was made.
Okay. Huh. I guess I'm just curious to hear, and I know I kind of feel like I've been asking this question a few times, but just if there's any other project that sticks in your mind that really seems similar to this. I mean, you mentioned that it was a little bit special because it was in Athens.
And it was one of the first ones. We were at the same time doing one on Lake Lanier that was very similar. It did not have, at Sandy Creek there's a big building out there they use for, I don't even know what they call it now. Got a big fireplace in it, kind of
well, I know there's one called the Pavilion, but I think that's, I know what you're
gathering
talking
place thing. We didn't build those kind of things at Lake Lanier, but we built a lot of RV camping areas where we put in concrete camping pads and individual picnic tables and individual grills and everything for RV camps. And then 5 or 6 restrooms scattered around the area and 4 or 5 boat ramps into the lake. Relatively similar to the Sandy Creek, except it was more closely associated with water because it didn't have basketball courts or tennis courts or anything like that. It was all strictly fishing piers and boat ramps. But it was much larger as far as area covered and dollars invested. It's and I didn't know this till I got involved. It's a lot more expensive to put in underground water and underground electric than it is to do most anything else. And we had to run that. They wanted all the utilities underground, and to disturb the least number of trees as possible.
Yeah.
So that's some constraints there that caused that one to be a lot more expensive.
Oh, I see.
The one we were doing one in Gwinnett County, we did all these in the 80s. One in Gwinnett County was about the same size, maybe a little larger. And there again, it was mostly RV camping.
Why was it that RV camping was built at those two sites?
I think the counties thought they could make some money.
Okay.
They could charge people to rent these spaces and at least bring in enough money to pay for maintenance.
Yeah.
Sandy Creek, they charge you, $1 to get in or whatever, but that doesn't anywhere near cover the cost. of the maintenance out there. I think that's the main reason was they saw a need for RV camping, and they thought they could at least have a nice area and it wouldn't cost them hardly anything.
Yeah, yeah. And neither of those projects, Lake Lanier or the Gwinnett County project, neither of those had basketball courts or tennis courts or. Huh.
If they do, we didn't participate. They might have put them in since,
Okay.
but initially, no. They
Yeah.
weren't designed for those the kind of things.
What about? Oh, sorry.
No.
What about beaches?
No. Neither project had a swimming beach. I'm not sure we could even put one on Lake Lanier. See, that's owned by the Corps of Engineers, and they have some restrictions as to what you can do within a certain number of feet of the water. We probably could have gotten special permission, but I don't remember them ever even talking about that. They just wanted recreation in the picnic areas. Oh, I bet. Sorry. I'm wrong. I know.
Okay.
We built a very large swimming beach up there because I remember it washed away one year right in the middle of construction. We had to redo it.
Oh dear.
Yeah. The flood came through and the lake came up and washed the whole thing away.
Oh my.
So we had to start over.
I guess
So
we're
yes,
still
there
to
is
know
a
first.
swimming beach in the one in Lake Lanier, but not in Gwinnett County.
And then you mentioned that there are underground utilities at both those parks, and that wasn't.
See, there are no utilities to the camping area.
Uh-huh.
That's why they call it at Little Sandy Creek.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to do all that
Yeah.
sewage, and so you didn't have to run sewer lines because
Yeah.
you've got an RV thing there. You've got to have the individual sewer lines, or at least have a central area they can come and clean out their tanks.
Oh, I see.
But if you don't have RV camping, you don't have to worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What about electricity then?
You know,
Same.
you have to have electric hookup on every campsite
Yeah. Huh.
so they can plug in your air conditioner. You know,
We're hoping
so you
this
watch your
experience-
TV. Yeah.
That's interesting. Huh. Huh. So it sounds like in all these cases, really the design of the park was completely left up to the counties, and you were.
Yeah.
But you did you did mention that when the design was chosen here, the SES really didn't approve it.
Not the initial architect. That's correct,
Uh-huh.
because we didn't feel he was qualified to design the buildings.
Okay, so it was actually the architect himself rather than the.
Yeah, as far as what they wanted, it was fine,
Okay.
and we ended up building what they wanted.
Yeah.
Now that wasn't the problem. The problem was just the firm they selected.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Let's see. So I suppose there was sort of some sort of a review process to approve of, an architect and then
Yeah.
give them money.
The way that the county hadn't been too involved with architects, so we told them we would develop a bid package and put out a bid for an architectural firm. Give them, preliminary idea of what we want so they could bid on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that, and when the bids came back, they were a little bit higher than we anticipated. Not all that much, maybe 10-15%.
Mm-hmm.
But they were way over what one of the county commissioners got with this other firm, this local firm.
Mm-hmm.
And he convinced everybody to go. It might have been Holland, I'm not sure. Don't know that. Don't quote me on that one. But they convinced the county to go with this fella. And they did, and he drew all these things up. And like I say, then they came back to us several years later and wanted us to review them and see if we could work with them and if we could do it. And our people at that time said, yes, we'll do it. So we put a couple engineers on it to redesign some of the areas and fix them so that we were able to build the building and it would last.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main thing we were worried about, were the buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And we did.
Yeah. Well,
there were a group of us that thought we shouldn't do that, that we should, instead of having our engineers involved in that, they should be doing other projects. But that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. So, so when the SES pulled back funds, was there ever talk of pulling back all of the funds for the recreation project, or just the architecture?
Just the architecture
Okay.
funds,
Okay.
yeah. Because we still wanted to build the project.
Yeah.
We just wanted to be sure that it was safe.
Yeah. Absolutely. What was it? How did working with the counties, with Gwinnett County or with the, I'm not sure what county
Whole
Lake Lanier
county.
is in, but okay, yeah. How did those county governments compare?
From my standpoint, they were pretty similar. Each county had in Clark County, there was a county engineer. In Hall County, they actually had a director of the recreation department that we worked with. In Gwinnett, same thing. They had a recreation director who was, in the other two counties, the people were not as diversified as George was. They didn't have to go out and pave roads and work on ditches. Their whole thing was recreation. That's all they were responsible for. So they could spend more time on it. They didn't get the projects done any quicker, but,
Oh, really?
but as far as working with them, George was easier to work with because he had the technical background. These folks were administrators. Very nice people, very willing to work, but they just didn't know. They couldn't talk to the engineers and engineer to engineer like George could. So it was harder to get some of the things to determine what needed to be done and explain to them and convince them this is what needed to be done. George didn't have any problem because he understood. You know, engineer to engineer, he'd understand. So no matter how gung-ho they were to get the work done, it was no more difficult. No more time consuming. We had to assign an engineer to those two projects who could explain things to people in layman terms. Didn't have to do that with George.
Yeah.
They had to do it with me because I didn't understand them either. But so from that standpoint, it was a little more difficult to work with them. But in all cases, I don't know why. Maybe just lucky. We worked with a group in all the county with people that wanted to get the work done. They wanted that project to succeed, you know, and they weren't worried about politics. And it's doesn't happen much anymore. So they took pride in seeing that it was done right. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Huh. What about the Oconee River Soil and
Water
Conservation Service? Yeah. Did you work with them?
That's a state agency
Okay.
that we work closely with.
Okay.
I didn't personally work with them, but our agency did in other aspects. Most of our work was working directly with farmers in erosion control. That's what 90% of our work has been ever since it was started. And the State Soil and Water Conservation Commission and Committee has the same goal, has the same purpose. So our local, when I say local, people that we had in the different counties surrounding worked directly with them, but I didn't
Okay.
at all.
Okay. And you don't remember working with them on the Sandy Creek project? Okay.
No.
I heard that they're
I'm sure they were involved at some
Yeah.
point, just because it's something in their bailiwick, but I didn't work directly with them.
Okay. What were some of the challenges that you faced with this project?
Well, once we got the architectural part straightened out, there weren't too many. It went pretty smooth. I guess one of the headaches that we had was George was getting work done quicker than we'd anticipated, so we had to keep going back and trying to get the funds moved up. In other words, if you've got a 10-year project, you got so many funds this year, and you'd have to go back and say, well, look, we need some more funds because it's going faster than we anticipated. Well, George, you're going to have to slow down and go do something else for a while because our money ran out.
Really? Wow.
So that was one of the things. It wasn't really a problem, but it was something that had to be done. I can't think of any. Sometimes we had, George would have some problems getting people out there because they had to go to court or something, All in all, I think it went pretty well. I really do. I was kind of surprised that the county was able to give George as much time to spend out there as they did. But they seemed to think he was getting everything else done too. So, and he was he was taking a lot of personal interest in it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that helped. I don't remember any big problems. I'm sure there were some. I know we had some internal problems in that we wanted to assign a couple more technicians at a certain point in time, or another additional engineer, because the work was going faster than we anticipated. And our people said, well, no, we need them somewhere else, so you had to kind of jockey that kind of thing around. But that's typical in any project,
Did you ever have to kind of slow the project down a little bit? Is that
Occasionally, especially toward the end of our fiscal year. If George would come up and say, look, we're going to try to start this building and we'll need this much. Say, well, look, George, our funds are run out. We don't have new funds until July 1st or whenever it is. You're going to have to wait a few weeks or a month or so before you commit us to the financial end of it. Other than that, no.
With those other two counties, did they use inmate labor for those projects?
No. The one in Hall County used their own staff. They had a big recreation staff, and they were qualified to do the buildings, build buildings and things. And in Gwinnett County, they actually had the road crew come in and cut the roads and pave the roads. I think we did hire a firm to do the actual asphalt paving, but they laid them out, put the base down and things like that. But they didn't use prisoners, to my knowledge. If they did, we didn't know about it. I think Clark County is the right place where we used prison labor.
Yeah.
Not prison labor, but jail labor, whatever they call those folks out there.
Seems like the term changes from from year to year.
The people with the black stripe on the side.
That's right. Working on the chain gang.
That's
You said that this project moved along more quickly than you expected, or than the agency expected.
Initially anticipated.
Yeah.
Because we didn't think that the county would be able to put as much time in it as they were able to, or that things would go as smoothly. When you plan something for an 8 or 10 year period, you try to think of all the problems, weather and politics and things that get involved that would slow it down, and that's why we thought it'd probably be an 8 or 10 year project.
Yeah.
If we were just going to go hire a contractor to do it, it probably was about a 4 year project.
Huh.
Maybe even less, because the contractor go in there and get it done. But we knew that the county couldn't put 20 people in there 40 hours a week. It just was not feasible.
Yeah.
Even if they'd had them, they couldn't do it. They have other work to do. So that's why we spaced it out that way, and make it easier for the county as far as they also had to have money to pay these people. And they didn't want to put a whole bunch of money out at one time. They spread it out, makes it easier for them. They're paying their county engineer and everything, and they didn't want to hire a bunch of people to go in there and work. So by spreading it out, it made it a little easier on everybody.
Did the other projects in those other counties that were comparable move along more quickly or less quickly? Or?
The one in Hall County went along a lot quicker, because the fellow that was in charge of the recreation director had his own staff. and he could decide what that staff did, every day. And he had several different areas to look at, but he concentrated most of his staff on that one project, so that which made it easier for him to get something done. He wasn't worried. He wasn't worried so much about his people being pulled off and go somewhere else to do something.
Yeah.
He didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah. We're getting out of jail or
Yeah.
whatever.
Get paroled.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. The others, the ones in Gwinnett and the other ones we were working on, pretty much stayed to schedule.
Okay. Was working with counties a new thing for the Soil Conservation Service? You'd mentioned that 90% of the folks that they worked with were farmers.
No, not as far as our flood control work was concerned. Anytime we would go into an area and want to build a dam for flood control, the county had to agree to help and get the land rights. So we've been working with them for 50 years or more on those kind of things.
Okay.
And I'm sure there were other things that we worked with counties with. That was the only thing I got involved in, was the watershed work. So no, that was not a new thing. That was old.
Okay.
We were used to doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't as though you were having to establish a relationship.
No, that was already there.
Okay. I see. Were those flood control projects, how long term did those tend to be as compared to the recreation projects?
Usually you'll go in 6 months you'll have it done.
Oh, really?
If it's a really large one, and depending on the time of year, if you start one in the fall, you're going to have to close down for a month or two because of bad weather. But if you start in the spring, you can have it done before the fall. Unless you're building a really big one now, like this one we built in, like I said, in Hall County for water supply, it was about a 3-year project.
Okay.
It was what was called a mass concrete dam. It was, I don't know how many 100,000 cubic yards of concrete. It was a tremendous job. They even had to bring their own concrete plant in and set up and make concrete on the site. So it took a long time. You had to put down a layer of concrete and let it set a while before you could do something, and then put another one and another one. So it was just the way it worked. It was time consuming. And I'm not sure they're done yet as far as the water supply. The water.
Really?
I don't think they've finished running all the water lines of the whole county, or whether they're even going to or not. When we set it up, we were just going to do the south end of the county, which included Banks Crossing, if you know where that is, where all the shops are up there.
Okay.
The outlet shops, all the
the
outlet
Commerce?
malls. Commerce.
Yeah.
That was the main reason the county wanted to build it, because they could supply water to those folks and charge them for it. And in turn, it paid, it gave the county some income where they could put the water lines other places.
Oh, I see.
That was what got them interested. And they're charging those people a lot of money for water.
I'll bet. Might as well reap them for all their work. How long did the flood control part of the Sandy Creek project take?
I don't know. It was started before I went with them. They started building those dams probably in the early 60s.
Oh, really?
Probably 8 or 10 years.
Okay.
I just don't know.
Okay. And what about that dam specifically, which I guess is, I know it's got a name, number
Chapman.
10 or whatever it is.
Yeah, number 10 is a watershed dam, and it's also called, the lake is called Chapman Lake or something like that.
Yeah.
There again, I don't know how long it took to build the dam, because it was done before I got with them. Before I went with them. It
So-
probably didn't take more than 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be a reason for it to take any longer than that.
Yeah. I see. But the actual project had started as early as the early 60s, you said?
The development of the project, I started back in the late 40s, early 50s. A lot of times, when SCS first got into this business back in the 40s, they went around and developed the different watershed areas and started developing the flood control needs. And our design engineers would design, set up where the dams need to be and the size of dams and all this kind of thing, and then put it on the shelf until we could convince the counties this is what they needed, and they needed to get the land so we could build the dam. And that might be 10 years down the road, or 20 years from the time it was actually planned by our planning department and something started. But now once it started construction, it should only take 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, I see. So that explains the big difference between the extent of the plans and the...
Yeah, see, when that plan was first developed, it was probably done in the 40s, early 50s at the latest. They might have had 14 or 15 dams there.
I see.
But some of the counties didn't want to get involved, or some of the counties, for various reasons, some of them weren't done or weren't needed.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Let's take a little break, because it looks like... Okay. We sort of talked about some of the different goals of the Soil Conservation Service, obviously, soil conservation being the main, and then recreation and flood control later. How important was wildlife management or sort of general natural resources management?
I tell you, at the time I was with them, we didn't do much.
Okay.
We're more interested in soil erosion than anything else. Building terraces on farmland and tiling to control water runoff rather than wildlife. We did do some wildlife plantings. If we were in a marsh area, if we could convince the landowner not to plow up that marsh area, we could plant it in some kind of feed for wild birds and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But we didn't do too much of that.
What about sort of any other general ecological management that looked at the flora and fauna, I guess, also, of the area rather than just the soil erosion? Is that?
Well, that all works together. You try to determine what's the best types of plants or types of grasses that you need to put in that area to get whatever the landowner wanted, plus control erosion.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's best to put it in pine trees. Sometimes it's best to grass the area with a fescue type grass, some kind of grass. I don't know. I'm not an agronomist. But those are the types of things we did with the landowners. Try to convince them, you've got a lot of runoff here. You've got to do something different. Here are some of the different things you can do. Okay. If your field is in row crops, stop it. Don't plant anymore. That's one option. Not a good one, because people need to plant to make money.
Yeah.
But that was an option. Just put it in hay or something. That's there again. And don't plow. No-till conservation, no-till tillage was a big thing with us. Go in and plant your plants without plowing, with various means. Either, I can't get into the details. I don't know. That wasn't my expertise. But for example, if we can convince the farmer not to go into what we call no-till, in the fall, you leave. Say you had a field of corn, you leave the corn stalks. You go in either in spring or fall, and with a disc, and you cut those corn stalks up and try to push them down into the soil. You don't remove them. You use them as mulch and to help stabilize the water, the earth. Then when you get ready to plant, you go in with a planter that instead of lots of planters, they dig a little trench, and put. Yeah. You don't do that. You go in with a planter that just pushes them down in the ground, and it doesn't disturb the surrounding, so you don't get a lot of this erosion. And you do that for several seasons, and you get a good base of mulch, and you get your plants. But it takes a little bit of chemical. You've got to use some chemicals to kill some of the weeds and things. So we got into some controversies with EPA and that kind of thing on what kind of chemicals to use, and was it causing runoff problems. So you had to take that into account too. But we still think it's a good method.
Yeah.
So yeah, and an overall, our people would go to the farmer and he'd and sit down with the farmer and he'd say, okay, he's got cows here and he's got corn growing here and he's got wheat here. Maybe that's not the best mix. Maybe you ought to move the wheat over here for some reason.
Yeah.
Or do something differently, or rotate your crops. Especially if you're doing things like cotton, you've got to rotate your crops. It just takes all the elements out of the soil. Your cows, if you've got a dairy operation, you've got a lot of runoff, and when you clean out your dairies, you've got a lot of stuff that's going to pollute the streams. You've got to do something with it, build a lagoon or something. And try to develop a whole plan for the whole farm. And then work with the farmer in getting it done, getting him to, and helping him lay out these different things so that eventually he'd have a pretty good operation and not causing too much erosion, environmental problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we still do that. That's a big thing around here. Chicken houses, waste and chickens, developing
I've been working upstairs.
different methods to control that or what to do with the waste.
Yeah. How big a problem was erosion in this area of Georgia and in that Sandy Creek area?
It's not too bad from here north. From Macon south, it's terrible. It was, because that was the big cotton growing area back in the turn of the century, and all the topsoil was gone. So it wasn't. The only thing that grew was pine trees, and then not very good ones.
Yeah.
So, but up here, in this particular area, erosion isn't as bad as in the South Georgia because of the soils, or North Georgia because of the hills and the mountains. But you have erosion everywhere. Every time it rains, you're going to get a little erosion. And if you've got a hill and you plow down the hill, you're just helping make furrows for the water to run down. You need to plow across the hill to help stop it, slow it down.
Yeah.
And that's all that the flood control work we did, is just slow that water down. You can't stop it. It's got to go off the land, but you can slow it down to the point where it doesn't take much of the dirt with it. And that's that thing we still try to do.
What about in the Sandy Creek Park area itself?
I don't think there was much problem. I think it was in pine trees or pasture.
Okay.
I don't think there was too much problem.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't remember seeing it. I wasn't out there when they built the dam,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
But you said the issue, the reason that the dams were originally built was flood control, not
That's right.
runoff or erosion. Okay. How did you sort of take that philosophy and then apply it to a recreation area?
Well, our wonderful Congress said, look, we've got some extra money here with all this pork business. We want to start a program where we get local rural recreation. No, we weren't authorized doing recreation work in downtown Atlanta. It had to be rural. And spend money in the rural areas to develop recreational projects. That's what started the whole thing. And as far as this particular one, I suppose somebody on our staff got the bright idea to go talk to the county commissioners and say, look, we're going to have some money. Why don't we do something with it? Let's keep it here and spend it. And that just ballooned into the park.
What about, as far as the types of plantings that, would have been done in a farm area? Were any types of plantings like that done at Sandy Creek, or?
I know our agronomists developed the types of grasses and things and plants that needed to be there. For example, the grass that's on the soccer field is a different type than what is on the bank across the way in the camping area because of different uses.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, and I know our agronomist did that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the trees and bushes and shrubs right there, I'm not sure they were that involved. They weren't
Yeah.
worried about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. But it wasn't really an eroded area in the first place, I suppose. So that
I don't
wasn't
think
so
so.
much of a concern.
I don't
Yeah.
think so.
So I think it was George Chandler who mentioned that after the Soil Conservation Service had come through and taken up a bunch of land for the dam, and some of the topsoil had gone into the dam, they did do some kinds of plantings. Do you remember anything like that?
Well, I know, of course, once they built the dam, they'd have to go back and put grass and things on the dam to stabilize it and around the edge. But that would have been all we would have done.
Okay. So nothing in those natural areas, or like where the hiking trails are.
Just in the development of the recreation area.
Okay.
But as far as building the dam for the flood control, no. We wouldn't have done anything but stabilize the bank around the lake.
Okay. Was wildlife management important in the Sandy Creek project? Was that ever considered a goal?
I don't think so. I don't remember ever hearing anything about it. Specifically, doing specific things for wildlife management. There were a lot of deer and things out there, but just naturally, they've always been there.
Yeah.
The Nancy Smith now, she might have put out some food for them, for some different animals, because she was real heavily involved in it, and the nature center. She was really in charge of the nature center mostly, and they gave her this when George left, I think. So she might have done something. I don't know. We didn't do anything for wildlife.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if that was sort of something that was in the plan at all or not. Yeah.
I don't believe.
Interesting. What was really particularly memorable about the Sandy Creek project? When you kind of think back on it, what stands out in your mind?
I don't know of any one thing that jumps out. It was I do like that building that's out there with that rock fireplace. I think that is very, very pretty. I think it really sets the tone for the whole place. Nothing.
What about the process of?
Just the fact that it got done is something. Because anytime you're dealing with politics, and county commissioners are political by nature, they have to be. You usually run into a bunch of problems and a bunch of delays. We didn't. It went very smoothly. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah.
Had it not gone smoothly, maybe something would have stuck out. But no, it went.
Is there anything that sort of stands out in your mind as a particular accomplishment of the park or of the?
Not really, because we did it in phases, and we knew what was going to be done in a particular year. So we were real happy to get it done and get it completed, and then just forget about that and move on to something else.
Yeah. Seems understandable. Did you work with Cecil Chapman?
A little. When I say a little, he retired not long after I started.
Okay.
So I didn't spend much time with him.
Okay. What do you remember about him?
I'm trying to think. Not much. So I'm trying to remember. It seemed like he was only there just. He might not even been there when I finally transferred, because I was working with him a little bit before I even transferred. With the Forest Service, we worked pretty close together with him.
Oh, I see.
So I knew him. I can't think of anything that stands out. I just know the name,
Yeah.
and I could picture him, but that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine. I've kind of been asking people since the lake was named for him. I figured.
Well, he was in charge of the Soil Conservation Service at the time they decided to actually do it.
Yeah.
So maybe he pushed it, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. How did the final outcome of the project compare with your original sort of expectations for it?
Actually, I think it ended up a lot better than we had anticipated. There again, since it was relatively new, that kind of thing is relatively new to us, that it went along so smoothly and finished up so nice, and it looked so great. I don't think we were really anticipating that it would turn out to be as nice as it was, just because we had no track record to know what to expect.
Yeah.
You know, I think everybody that was involved in it is very pleased with what happened and what is still happening out there.
Yeah. When you say better than you expected, I mean, what specific things were better than?
It just looks nicer than you think about when you see it on paper. You know, you see a building here and you see a grassed area there and a boat ramp or a fishing pier. It just looks, and they fit in with the surroundings. You know, there's one fishing pier out there. If you don't know where it is, you can't find it because it's nestled back in the trees in a cove back in there, and it looks like it's been there forever. I mean, that kind of thing really is what we wanted to see.
Yeah.
And it worked. You know, so it turned out a lot nicer than we had anticipated on paper.
What about the actual use of the park?
I don't know. I assume it's getting a lot of use.
Yeah.
As I say, I haven't been out there in 15 years probably, maybe more. So I don't know. I guess I think it's probably getting as much use as they want it to have. You know, you don't want too many people if you can help it, because it overruns the place. I know I was out there once. I'll take that back. I was out there about 12 years ago to a retirement party. We rented that building, whatever they call it out there, for a little retirement party for one of our fellows. And everything was there and everything worked.
Because the building didn't fall on your head?
No, it didn't fall down or anything.
It's all a matter of what your expectations are.
I suppose.
Well, I was going to ask you if you ever visit the park, but it sounds like you haven't been out there in quite a while.
No, I haven't.
Why not?
I don't know. It's just there's nothing out there that when I go to do recreation, I don't do those kind of things. Very seldom.
Yeah.
Just haven't had the reason, a need.
What kinds of things do you do?
Oh, you know, I play golf or sit around with the grandkids and that kind of thing. Read. Or my wife and I like to go gamble. So we don't fish or anything.
Yeah. Actually, when you mentioned golf, it reminded me of something I wanted to ask, which was there ever any sort of talk of having a golf course?
I think there was. I think that about halfway through the project, somebody mentioned that this would be a good location and a good need for a city-owned or county-owned golf course. And I don't know if it got any further than that. I think one of the, and here I'm just trying to remember, the area is located almost at the very end of the county. In other words, if you go to the upper end of the lake, you're in a different county.
Yeah, it borders Jackson County.
So that limited what Clark County could do. They would have to, if they're going to build a golf course, it had to be on county land. They couldn't go in Jackson County and buy land.
I see.
And I think there was also already housing development approved by the Planning Commission and the County Commission to go in below it. So it was kind of restricted what they could do because they would have had to get a lot more land.
Okay.
Some of us thought. I think at the time, initially, thought it'd probably be a good idea. But I don't think it ever flew. I don't think people were really interested in doing it.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that a lot of projects like that do have golf courses, but I guess. What have you been doing since you retired? Hanging out here.
That's essentially it. Wife and I try to keep this place going.
Uh-huh.
Learn a new vocation, I guess you'd say.
Uh-huh.
How to engrave. And I don't do that very well. Wife does.
Now, what did you do again? You mentioned that after working here, you then did some field work in West Virginia and flood control and that kind of thing for the Soil Conservation Service. How long were you in that position?
That was just I was still here, but when they'd have a natural disaster,
Uh-huh.
they'd put together a team from all over the country. There'd be maybe 6 or 8 of us would get together and go to that area and spend a week or a month or whatever, or come and go. Did that for a couple of years, and then I retired. It was just before I retired, they finally decided to do that. But at that time they had 2 teams. One essentially would take care of things west of the Mississippi, and the rest of us would take care of east of the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And they think we got the raw deal because they had more problems east of the Mississippi. They had hurricanes in South Carolina, and hurricanes in Florida, and hurricanes in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was part of our area. And then this tremendous flood they had in I think it was 86 up in West Virginia, just what killed a bunch of people, and it was a mess.
And what was your actual job in that?
We were hiring the contractors,
Okay.
working up the contracts, bidding the jobs out, signing the contracts, seeing the work got done, agreeing to pay them if they did the work right,
Mm-hmm.
or get rid of them and get someone else if they didn't. On a short fuse, we were doing these contracts. We'd bid the contract, award the contract, and have the contractor on site in less than a week. And we'd have maybe 30 or 40 contractors at the same time because of the big area. So it was a lot of paperwork to
Yeah.
get things going. And see if the work got done, because we only had a short time period to get it done before the rainy season started again. Those kind of things were a lot of fun. And then, of course, the ones that did in South Carolina or in Florida were mostly beach erosion.
Mm-hmm. That's right, you mentioned that.
So that restabilized the beach.
So the actual work of the job is somewhat similar to what you had done here, but
Just in an accelerated mode. You had to cut a lot of corners and do a lot of things that you normally wouldn't do. For example, normally when you bid a project, you give them a 30-day period to go in and look at it and decide what they want. Well, we gave them 48 hours in some cases. So it was a lot different. And a lot of times you run into problems because they weren't able to, in that length of time, really see what. So you had to work with the contractors a little closer.
yeah. Why did you decide to retire?
I just got tired of the politics.
Really?
When we first started, the emphasis was to go in and do a job, do a good job, and get it done. Toward the end, it was appease the politicians. And I just got tired of it. So in the mid-90s, Congress decided that the Department of Agriculture had too many people. They had to get rid of about 25% of the workforce. Had a reduction in force, as they call it, or downsizing.
Mm-hmm.
And they offered anybody that had 30 years service, they could retire on immediate retirement. So I volunteered. Yeah, took it. It was 5 years earlier than I had planned. I was going to work 5 more, but I decided to take it now and get out.
And how long had you been with the Soil Conservation Service at that point?
I'd been with the government for 31 years.
Okay, including the Forest Service?
Yeah. 20 with the Soil Conservation Service.
Okay. when you said there's sort of too much politics, was that more on a local level or a federal level?
Federal level, putting up with bureaucrats within the agency who were trying to make a name for themselves so they could move on up or go into politics on their own. It just wasn't as much fun as it had been, let's put it that way.
Huh.
A lot of us felt that way, and a lot of us got out.
Huh. That's interesting. What do you have any idea why that might have been at that?
Just the nature of them. I think all agencies go through that, federal and state. Soil conservation have been around now about 60 years. That's a long time. And a lot of the people were a big portion of the people were eligible to retire. Were retiring. They're bringing in a lot of new people, and things just change. Methods have changed. Things don't work the same now as they did 20 years ago.
Yeah. Do you think that the actual nature of the projects changed as well? Or?
In a little bit, not too much. They're still doing the same basic things. Erosion control with local farmers. That's our bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
They're still doing that, but they're not doing much of anything else. Of course, their work staff is about a third of what it was 20 years ago. They're still reducing down.
Yeah.
So and as they reduce down, they cut the programs out. And for example, we're not doing much watershed construction projects anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Just these emergency type things.
Hmm.
Very few floodwater dams are being built anymore.
Hmm. Yes.
Just a new direction, a different direction.
Yeah. Had that already started to happen when the Sandy Creek project was in process?
No.
Really?
No, that was the heyday of,
Really?
besides, like I say, that was the first of the recreation projects.
Uh-huh.
So it was just this, everybody was enthused because we had a new program to try and get something done.
Huh.
And spend money in the local area. That was one thing Soil Conservation Service was good at. If they got money, they spent it in the local area. They didn't spend it in Washington or Philadelphia or weird places like that.
Weird places. So when you say it was the heyday
Of the recreation work, of money available to do those kind of things. And the watershed work too. We had a lot more money in the 70s and early 80s to do watershed construction work than they do now. The money's diverted. Well, salaries have gone up so much, and cost of everything, cost of buying cars and things. There isn't that much money left in the total budget to do much. And Congress has cut the budget too, which in some ways I can understand that. You have fewer people, you ought to have a lower budget.
Yeah.
But, so, different directions, different groups. So I don't know if they'll ever get back into doing much floodwater work. Probably not. It's probably,
You mentioned that as a flood control project, Sandy Creek worked. Have any studies been done of that, or is that?
I believe so. Every year, and I'm trying to think of the intersection, on North Avenue, I can't think what the crossroad is. You come in off the bypass. What street is that? Can't remember, but anyway, there was an area, several areas in Athens that every year would flood. They don't flood anymore. They still could, and they still, if you get a really tremendous rain, you could get some flooding. But the normal rainfall, they don't get any flooding anymore. So yes, it works. I don't know if a study is actually done to see just how much it reduced, but we can tell by going to these areas that in the 70s when we first moved down, it flooded every year. They don't flood it.
Do you think it worked as a recreation area?
I think it still is. Like I say, we mentioned earlier, I don't know how many people go up there, but it's still being used.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people are getting benefit from it.
Do you think that's something that the Soil Conservation Service should get back into?
I wish they would, yes. I think it's a good thing for, well, like areas of the state and country that don't have much recreation. We have the infrastructure to go in and do that and to build a recreation area in there if Congress will give us the money. But they don't. I mean, it's not something we're allowed to do anymore. We can't spend our money on that anymore. But yes, I think I'd like to see them do it. I think it's something that's needed and something that will pay benefits for many years. Just like Sandy Creek, it's paying benefits now. People have a place to go to do,
I guess I'm about done with questions. Do you have anything to add?
The only thing that really strikes me at Sandy Creek that if it hadn't been for George Chandler's enthusiasm, it would not have been completed. I mean, he just did a tremendous job. He was really concerned, and he kept people up. And if something wasn't getting done quick enough, he'd call them. He'd say, "What's going on?" You know, he wasn't bashful, and he kept the people working, and he did a good job. And I think I'd like to see him named after him, but he's not a politician, so it doesn't work that way. But no, that's the main thing. If there had been a different county engineer, it may or may not have gotten. It probably would have gotten completed, but it might not have gotten to the quality that we've got out there. And then when Nancy Smith came on, she was really interested in keeping it up. I think that helped too. The first couple of years it was in operation kind of set the stage, and people wanted to go up there. They enjoyed it, and they kept the price down. They're still down.
I think it's $2.
Is it $1 a piece or $2 a
$2
person
now,
or
but
something?
they just raised it just a couple of years ago. Yeah.
That's still pretty darn
Yeah.
reasonable.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Brought back a lot of memories.
Okay.